Welcome everyone to the July webinar for the TELedvisors Network. Today we're going to be looking at different ways that we make a difference in learning and teaching, joined by Alexandra Mihai from Maastricht University and Sarah Thorneycroft and Steph Toole from the University of New England. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. Please feel free to acknowledge your local people in the chat if you like. For those who aren't familiar with the TELedvisors Network, we are a community of practitioners, people working in roles across the third space, learning designers, academic developers, education technologists, and all of the associated titles that go with this. I think Kate and Chair and myself did some research and we found about 40 odd titles in job ads, and I'm sure there are far more than that. If you are working in this space or you're interested in working in this space, please do feel free to join us. There's a link up there, bit.ly/join TELedvisors. We've got a little form. We've also just launched our newsletter. So a number of people may have already signed up to that, may have received that. If you are interested in receiving that, that will be coming out on a semi-regular basis, just with information about webinars and profiles of members and other news of interest. And obviously we are also on Twitter, because where else would you be? And we do thank Ascolite for their ongoing support. So I'm going to be utterly shameless here for a second. And this is not the last time you're going to hear about this, believe you me, but I do have a survey up at the moment as part of my PhD research about the work that we all do. If you haven't seen it yet, if you are working in this role, in this space in Australia, I'd really appreciate it if you could take some time. There's a lot in there. I will admit it'll probably take 20 to 30 minutes. You may be better off doing it on a device rather than on a mobile device. But yes, so anyway.
All right, can we see slides now?
Yes, all good.
Yep.
Great. All right, thanks. All right, so just before we get started, and because it was discussed originally, it will give you a little bit of context from our organisation to kind of frame what we're about to talk about. So the University of New England went through, at the beginning of last year, a major workplace change. And through that, the digital education portfolio was created. It's not an exact analogue to a teaching and learning centre, but the digital education portfolio is the one that I lead. And within that is the learning design team that Steph leads. Specifically, the learning design team is an integrated team. And so it drew all of the learning design and educational support officers who were previously distributed across the organisation into a unified team, and we work in integrated ways across the university. And I use that language very specifically because my focus is really on disrupting the central-decentral discourse. There are more than two options. And we don't, I think the wording in the slides was under one roof. We aren't under one roof. We are distributed all across the university, across the country. The story I tell is that one of my staff moved to Queensland and I didn't notice because it didn't matter. So we work in all sorts of different ways, and from my perspective, we are integrated into the fabric of the university. So that's kind of our context that we're working in, and what we are going to talk about today is the art of impact. And specifically impact in terms of how we can enable advisors, so learning design et al. Roles, to have impact. And sorry, I'm going to throw up another slide here. This is specifically not a definition of impact. Impact is something that everyone needs to define for themselves. This is the how of impact. And so before we go any further, just for some context, in case anyone's going to be disappointed, we are not talking about teaching and learning today. We're not talking about research, or our focus specifically is on praxis. I think in the abstract we talked about the intentional design of praxis, and that's a really strong component of how I lead the portfolio, and also in how Steph leads the learning design team, and how we can develop our practice to have more impact in the ways that we define impact for us. I'm also really conscious that the audience here today is not a group of leaders, and there'll be a lot of people who are not in leadership roles. So we've tried to kind of split the difference between talking about our leadership approach, but also give strategies that you can actually take away as individuals and integrate into your own practice. Because this presentation needs to have impact. And if we just kind of waffle on as leadership, you'll go away and say, cool story, Thorneycroft. But so what? So that's the framing for the presentation today. And we are going to run you through just 3 quick areas work in to help facilitate impact. The roles of Steph and I here will kind of mirror the way that they happen in real life. So I will do some conceptual waffling that kind of describes the higher level leadership approach, and then Steph will be able to give some concrete examples of things that we've done, because that's I really see my role at the higher level as making space for the teams to be effective, and then the teams are the ones who really come through and do the things. So all right, so three ways that advisors can have impact. Number 1, don't do things. So this is one of the areas that we've been really focused on, and I'm going to do a really light touch skim through some concepts here. The Padlet really has more detail, so we'll rip through fast, and then you can both read through and contribute to the Padlet as we go on. So don't do things. What do I mean? So don't do things. And this is really where we talk about impact is enabled by focus and intention. So saying no, the art of saying no is something that we focus on. It's something that needs to be really intentionally addressed. People don't inherently come with those capabilities pre-installed necessarily. So developing people's capacity to say no, and not just say no to bad things or things you don't like, but actually say no to good things or things that you think you would be able to do really effectively, that would be really valuable. Doing too many of those, if you're trying to do everything or do too much, that really dilutes your ability to have impact. So enabling people to say no is a really important one. How do you know what to say no to? Is enabled by being really intentional about what you want to achieve and what activity is going to line up with achieving that. So having goals set, and that's where you can have a vision and a direction set by leadership, or your own goals for what you personally care about achieving. Both is great. But this is kind of a physician heal thyself moment, in that one of the ways that can be really useful for doing that is constructive alignment. So bigsing yourself up in terms of identifying what the learning outcomes you want to achieve and what things that you can do that are going to line up with achieving that is really powerful, to have a way to prioritize and make decisions about what you are and aren't going to do and what you are and aren't going to spend your energy on. And another key thing here, and then I will stop talking and pass to Steph, is before you do things, question things. I mean, if you mean you question everything, but before taking action, asking where something is coming from, what's behind it, why is this thing being done? Should this be done differently or not at all? Is the right person doing it? That's a really high value area for being able to actually address and design ways to have impact, rather than kind of suffering the tyranny of legacy in what you're doing. I'm going to shut up. Steph's going to give you the practice example now.
Thanks, Sarah. I think you've set the scene well. So what does not doing things look like in practice for our team, and how could that possibly lead to impact? So when the learning design team formed in early 2021, as Sarah described, each person brought with them a range of different practices, responsibilities, and experiences, but they pretty much all had one thing in common, and that was that they were very busy, they were stretched thin, and they were often reactive to the requests and needs of others. This meant that they had very little space for focus and intentionality. So in an effort to address this, we set about questioning and then redesigning one of our core business processes related to the setup of teaching sites in the learning management system each teaching period. In picking this one focus, we then set a common goal, a more efficient, equitable, and sustainable business process. And as a team, we began disentangling the process step by step, person by person, to understand what we were doing, why we were doing it, whether it aligned to our goal, and then we reassembled the process from start to finish. Along the way, we identified a bunch of things that we were doing that didn't bring us closer to the goal, things that were not very impactful. And so wherever possible and wherever defensible, we stopped doing those things. In some cases, that meant we had to say no to academics, or not anymore, or not at this stage, or not in that particular way. And we had to reckon with a bunch of legacy practices, because just doing the same things that we had always done was not creating space to do the other things in the learning and teaching space with that intentionality and focus. So we collaboratively as a team redesigned the business process from the ground up, and we've arrived at now a really lean, sustainable, and distributable process that across the team means that we have more space to do those things that have impact. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Steph. All right, next up, do hard things. So yes, people in the chat noticing saying no is saying hard, resisting the urge to be helpful is hard. There's probably going to be several places in the room who are going to find some of the things that we're saying very challenging. That is absolutely fine and by design. So what counts as hard things that enable impact? So the first one, Colin's talking about resisting the urge to be helpful, reckoning with yourself, and our own brains can be big barriers to impact sometimes in terms of how we construct our own identities and our sense of professional value. So there's some things in the Padlet that might sound familiar to some of you there, but actually being willing to reflect on and then lean in and poke those is a really hard thing, but it can have so much impact on your ability to have impact. So that's a key thing, number one. Working on hard mode in general. I've scooped a few things in here. Working with hard people. So a very common phenomenon, because often our work is opt-in. People are not required to engage with us and work with us. It's easy to work with the friendly people, the enthusiastic people, the keen people who want to really develop their teaching and learning practice. but their real impact lies in working with the hard people. That's one. Having difficult conversations and saying the things and addressing things that other people don't address is another really good impact space. I think Steph mentioned the doing the same things over and over again phenomenon is never going to lead you to different results. So actually changing what you're engaging with and having new and different conversations is really valuable. It's hard. And this is where in a lot of these areas, like absolutely leadership has a role in enabling and supporting your staff to do the hard things is really key. But also, if you are somebody in the room who's not in a leadership role, there's also a lot you can do yourself in terms of seeking out, interpersonal strategies and different ways to build relationships and engage with people. And the last one is do things that don't look like the thing. So I told you that we're not talking about teaching and learning, and we're not talking about teaching and learning because sometimes the best way to have impact on teaching and learning is to have impact on things that are not teaching and learning. A lot of the barriers to having impact on teaching and learning have nothing to do with the actual art and science of teaching and learning and everything to do with existing as people in organisations. And so it can be really worthwhile spending energy on things that don't look like the end game, but really enable the end game. Over to you, Steph.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, an example of in practice where we have gone full hard mode. Online exams certainly springs to mind. So it's worth acknowledging that our colleagues in the exams and the assessment team, which sits within digital education, are absolutely fantastic and have done a phenomenal job in scaling up the use of online exams in the context of COVID. But as some of you have probably likely experienced, online supervised exams are a bit of a contentious issue in the sector. There's plenty of negative rhetoric out there. There's always a story in the Sydney Morning Herald. And it's a newish area for lots of academics who are very used to paper-based exams and all of the familiar and refined administrative processes and support practices that are developed around that kind of exam. So, what are we to do with a situation where some academics are waiting and hoping that it'll all blow over and we'll go back to paper exams? Well, we could focus our attention on supporting those academics that are opt-in because they're really engaged and enthusiastic about all the ways that online exams can allow for richer and authentic assessment. Or we could do what we are currently doing, and that is working really closely in integrated ways with our colleagues in the exams and the assessment team, as well as the academic development team and administrative services, to go out to every single academic with an online exam this trimester, even the hard people and even the people that hate online exams, and having those challenging conversations, having those insightful conversations and understanding where they're coming from, and hopefully having helpful conversations about how we might be able to work with them to design and develop more sustainable and authentic online exams. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Steph. And I think it's probably worth acknowledging, because we will not be alone in this phenomenon in the room, the notion of doing it scared is really useful in acknowledging that hard things are hard and scary, and even, it's something that we can do even when it's terrifying and not something that we feel at all comfortable with. And I know that's definitely the case for both Steph and I. So I say that as a means of encouragement for people in the room who also are frankly terrified by the thought of doing these hard things. And the last one. So last topic of waffling, doing easy things. So this is based on the phenomenon, which also requires some really intentional addressing within the team, because society really hard codes us to associate productivity and value and worth with output of tangible objects and or saying things in meetings. And that's a really hard thing to reckon with. But there are so many other things that are really, really critical to enabling impact that don't look like work at all in a lot of cases. And that was something that we really had to intentionally teach people strategies to decouple that and have particular strategies and language that we use to unpick that, to allow people to engage in these really effective approaches. And by easy things, what do we mean by things that are easy that don't look like work? I'll cover a couple of things, and then I'll let Steph talk to you about the community of practice and other team building work that goes on. I use the phrase permission to coffee. So the notion of having coffee, which looks very much to most people like not doing work, sitting in a cafe with a coffee, talking, actually has so many affordances to achieving impact. And it's really critical, but people find it really hard to feel like, if I'm doing this, I'm not doing anything, I'm not being productive, this is just a distraction. Like, no, this is the work. And so actually quite a lot of what I do is just having this coffee with people. But yeah, actually empowering yourself or your staff to feel allowed to do that is really key. And another thing that I am very pro is shit posting, particularly because we have a really strongly digital first team in the ways that we interact. So we interact online first, and creating a culture and a climate in which people can bring their whole selves rather than a very edited, redacted, professional facade to the team is really important. And so I think I've worded it in the Paddler as, trust, safety and wellbeing are built with dog pictures and memes, not rules and directives. I think that's really important. And it's one that really makes a lot of people itchy because it doesn't sound professional. Swearing doesn't sound professional. Memes don't sound professional. And I think it's really important to start poking at what do we mean when we say professional? What is it actually enabling? Are there better ways to enable impact? I'll throw to Steph now to finish up, and then we will stop talking and can move to the question discussion component of this webinar.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. I'll try to keep this nice and short. In talking about how we've engaged in community of practice, I think it's worth touching on this because the way we've engaged with community of practice isn't perhaps what you'd quite expect. It doesn't look like real work. We don't meet as a team to talk about learning and teaching necessarily, and we don't convene these community of practices around certain areas of expertise or scaring skills. Instead, we talk about all the other stuff that makes us tick. We talk about who we are and what we do. We spend an hour every fortnight at least talking about these things of which parts of our work we find meaningful or what we're proud of. What in the past year did we love or loathe or learn or long for? And when we do talk about the skills or the things that we think are worth sharing with our colleagues, the things that help us have that impact, we talk about things like empathy and fun and patience and flexibility and project management and adaptability. So these are the kind of things that we've prioritized making space for and sharing and celebrating, which to some on the surface might look like a bunch of unproductive time and some fairly fanciful thinking. But the community of practice sessions have enabled our team to develop a real sense of trust and rapport and respect for each other that then allows us to be a high performing team and for us to go out and do those things in the learning and teaching domain that have impact.
Cool, that's it. Thanks, Steph, and thanks everybody for listening. I'm going to stop sharing now, And I will hand to Colin to now how the
Wow.
go from here.
Again, you guys always deliver. So thank you so much. There was just so much to think about in that. I do apologize if I misrepresented your thing. Again, I was probably going more for the vibe of units organizations do in our institutions and how sort of make things happen.
So good, not misrepresented at all.
So lots of love in the chat there. Do we have any particular questions for either Sarah or Steph or Alexandra? I'm literally just in the process in our team space. I think what might be useful is actually having like a dedicated area for discussions to continue, because I'm noticing a few
asynchronous would be really easy.
So we might sort of share some resources, put the videos in there, and discussion can continue. But if people have questions that they'd specifically like to ask right now, please do go ahead. I think mics are on, so you should be able to also just pipe up. And yes, the recording will be made available in the coming days.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hey, Colin, it's Prue. Sarah, or Steph, or anyone really, I just wondered, how do you go with this idea of sort of taking it easy and getting a bit more informal and having these pretty chill sessions? How do you go with inclusion? Because some of the things we run into with doing this is like, because I agree, I don't mind dropping the odd swear word, like that works just fine, but it actually doesn't really work culturally in the environment I'm working in. And you know, it's the same with, well, I like to have an informal meeting where we talk about what makes us tick, but actually there's quite a few people who really keep their work life separate to their personal life, and they don't want to share those things. So it winds up being a community of practice that's maybe a little bit exclusive and doesn't have everyone in it. And I just wonder, just as a leader, how are you tackling those issues, which I'm sure you've come up against?
Yeah, so two things, which I won't answer your question on the second half of the question, because I've done a post on temperament inclusive pedagogy, or a Twitter thread that talks about how we how I design things so that people can feel included in different ways in terms of proclivity to peopling, preferred mode of communication, that kind of thing. The cultural thing is a really interesting one, and while that particular issue, that particular phenomenon is not what I've directly navigated within this particular team, the best approach I usually find is just being really explicit and actually talking about why you're doing things. So I don't go for shock value just for the sake of it. You know, I'm always careful to explain why I'm doing a thing, how it lines up with achieving our goals. So swearing, for instance, I'll talk about that in terms of I swear because it reduces distance. It's a method of connecting so that people don't feel the distance of hierarchy, and that really enables engagement. So saying those words out loud really goes a long way, rather than just doing a thing and then it becomes awkward or exclusive.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. And thanks for a great presentation. Gosh, I got so much out of that. Thanks to both you and Steph, and also to Alexandra earlier. Thanks.
We have a question from Penny asking how formal the communities of practice on the US campuses are. This is to Alexandra.
I was just about to write an answer, but actually it's better to just say it. So I'm not so sure I encountered or saw so many communities of practice as such, more learning communities, faculty learning communities. And I'm also not very sure what you mean by formal, in the sense that they do meet every 2 weeks or every month, depending. And some of them have a more like a clearer focus. Like some of them would be disciplinary, like a STEM community or even a specific discipline within STEM. But what I meant, I think what you I imagine what you mean by formal is how structured. I have the feeling they tend to be rather unstructured. Of course, there is never full lack of structure because you cannot really have a community like that. But I feel like they were quite loose in terms of structure, and that made the ones I experienced and I was sort of part of or could at least observe seem to be very nice, safe spaces, and the people had a very deep sort of level of trust and connection. So I really, really like that. But on the contrary, I would have liked to see maybe a community of practice among educational developers, for instance, but I haven't seen one of those, at least not a formal one. So I'm sure there are.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Steph. This is one of the things that I really like the most about this group is just these kind of conversations that we have, and you're just amazing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Colin. Thanks for having us along.
Yeah. Thank you.